Welcome back, everybody. I'm Matt Williamson, and I'm back with the results from the surveys you all took on rating and ranking the Beatles' worst songs. Now, this was an exercise that was very successful. This is probably my most successful survey yet, and I thank you for everybody that partook in this. I'm going to give you some of the results in a minute, which are rather interesting. And initially, when I did this exercise, this worst list, people oftentimes, it's very clickbaity, and a lot of people will stay away from it because you just get hammered if you dare to say something by the Beatles or a solo Beatle is bad or something is lacking in some way. And I really wanted to do this to broaden the discussion a bit because we all have reasons why we don't like songs, and that's how I built my criteria, which I gave in the original video. So what I did here, everybody had a chance to vote for as many as 12 songs. And I had over 3,100 song entries for this survey. So I'm going to go over some of the results here. So as you might expect, Revolution 9 was at the top. That had 148 votes from people. And generally speaking, that's the one that most people just don't even consider a song. It's often considered noise. So I understand why that would be disliked. Now, number 2 on the list was Mr. Moonlight, 121 votes. Third, we've got Wild Honey Pie, 105. And then fourth, we have Dig It from the Let It Be album. So those are the only ones that got over 100 votes each. Number 5 is at 91, that's Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Number 6, What Goes On from Rubber Soul. Number 7, this was a little bit of a surprise, Little Child. This got 82 votes, which was rather high compared to the other songs on that album. Blue Jay Way at 78, 72 votes for Don't Pass Me By, and You Like Me Too Much at 65 votes. So that rounds out the top 10 of what you guys ranked as the Beatles' worst songs. Now I'm going to go through the next 20 here briefly, and then we're going to look at some other numbers here that are even more fascinating. So 11 through 20, we have You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, All Together Now, Good Night, When I Get Home, Honey Don't, Honey Pie, Maggie May, Obla Di Obla Da, The Continuing Story of Bungalow Bill, and The Ballad of Johnny Yoko. So that rounds out the top 20 songs on this survey. Continuing on with the next 10, we've got Only a Northern Song, Dizzy Miss Lizzie, Why Don't We Do It in the Road, Babies in Black, Rocky Raccoon, Hold Me Tight, Matchbox, Piggies, The Inner Light, and finally, A Taste of Honey. So that rounded out top 30 most disliked or worst Beatles songs by those who took the survey. And my 25 worst songs, 17 of those are on this list. So the criteria I use, I think a lot of us share the same criteria if we think the lyrics aren't good or we think it's too long, too repetitive, derivative, whatever that may be. But I think that my choices were not that far out of what most people's were according to the people that took the survey. One of the things I did forget about completely was that I didn't consider the Anthology songs and Now and Then. I didn't even mention it when I did the original video on the worst songs. And the reason I didn't is I don't consider those songs in the Beatles canon. They were done decades after the Beatles broke up, well after the 60s. Members had been gone. They weren't intended to be released. So I don't consider those in the canon. However, they did get some votes. Now and Then being the biggest vote getter with 11, Free as a Bird 8, and Real Love 5. So I thought that was significant in that I didn't mention those. There were also a couple other stragglers here of songs I also didn't consider because they were released, they were like outtakes or released unreleased originally, but released many years later on the Anthology discs. For example, What's the New Mary Jane, If You've Got Troubles, and Teddy Boy. Those 3 got some votes as well. Now, one of the things that's interesting here, if you look at the most songs on this worst list, these top 30, 10 of the songs are from the White Album. That leads any of the albums. The next most tracks from an album is 3 by Beatles for Sale. And then we have 2 from Let It Be, 2 Yellow Submarine, 2 from Past Masters, 2 from With the Beatles, and 2 from Help. Now, if you see anybody's rankings of the worst Beatle albums, you will find Beatles for Sale, Let It Be, the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, With the Beatles, Help. Those get mentioned in that bottom third probably more than any of the others. So that's not that surprising. What is surprising is that the White Album had the most tracks. And if you actually calculated the percent of these worst tracks from each album, the White Album, out of all the tracks, 3,100, 24% of those came from the White Album. You might say, well, Matt, that's to be expected because you've got Revolution 9 on there. Well, let's remove that one. 19% of all the songs chosen were from the White Album if you remove Revolution 9. So what that means is that I figured out what percent was from each album. So if we're going to be kind here to the White Album and say, well, you remove Revolution 9, which I probably shouldn't do, but let's do it for the sake of argument. And well, it's a double album. So that 19% really should be split in two, so that'd be 9.5%. So that still is almost the highest ranking amount of songs that were rated as the worst. Beatles for Sale, 10% of the songs on this list were from Beatles for Sale. So those two, both the White Album, if you consider those as separate discs, which nobody does, because who would break that up? That's 24%. Beatles for Sale's at 10%. With the Beatles, 8%. Let It Be, 8%. Help, 6%. And 6% of the songs are from Abbey Road. So Abbey Road, the songs that were listed here, there were quite a few other songs that ranked a little bit high. For example, Octopus's Garden, Her Majesty, Oh Darling did get some votes. Come here, Bogey. I don't know if you can see him. He's crying or giving me a hard time. He's out of camera here. But it's interesting to see where all these songs fell. Now, one of the fascinating things, so there are roughly 220 songs to choose from. I didn't include the Anthology stuff, or that includes the covers, but not the Anthology stuff. Only 20 songs in the Beatles catalog were not chosen on this list. So if this went to many more people over a longer time, every song at some point would probably be chosen as their worst song. So not that that's important, but you got to look at the ends. What get the highest votes? What get the lowest votes? So some of those lowest votes that get 1 or 2 votes, very negligible. It's the high ones that I was more concerned with. I guess what I'm saying is that if you have enough people, following criteria that, and you get kind of a consensus over a wide range of people, in this case it would be my viewers, maybe that's a little bit skewed to begin with. That's arguable. But you get a little consensus, okay, this is what kind of the field of Beatle fans are thinking if you had to rate them. So the point of this is to broaden the discussion of the Beatles. Now, one of the things that I took from this, the fact that you have the most songs from the White Album, what does that mean? It doesn't mean it's a bad album. Because on the White Album, obviously, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts on that album. And there's probably no other album where that is more appropriate to say. So you have here an album that works together cohesively as a whole and is considered by many to be their best work. But yet a lot of people dislike a lot of stuff on it. So that's a topic in itself. I think that's very interesting. Now you're probably wondering what 20 songs didn't get chosen. Let me put those up on the screen for you. Some of them are a little bit surprising. And as I said, I think if this survey went long enough, at some point, every song would be chosen. I think one of the songs I probably should have put on my list and didn't was You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. And considering that as somewhat of a novelty song, I didn't really rate it as, it didn't fit the criteria very well for me. So a lot of people chose that one. Anything on here else that was a surprise to me? I mean, Little Child I didn't expect it to be that high. But that one was, Blue Jay Way I expected. Don't Pass Me By was number 9. So that was a little higher than I expected as well. You did get a lot of, if you looked at each album, every, the George Harrison Indian songs, there are some people that just don't care for that, which I completely understand. So some of those got rated a little bit lower. It's kind of funny, you got an album like Revolver. None of the worst songs in the top 30 are from Revolver or Sgt. Pepper. For example, the highest vote getter on Revolver is Love You Too. That's one of George's Indian songs. That came in at 19 votes. Yellow Submarine at 18. Dr. Robert at 16. I'm Only Sleeping also at 16. But you know, you get a bit of a consensus, and I wasn't that surprised that Mr. Moonlight, Wild Honey Pie Dig It, and Maxwell Silver Hammer rounded out the top 5 along with Revolution 9. So I think that's about right. With What Goes On, Little Child, Blue Jay Way, Don't Pass Me By, and You Like Me Too Much in there. So I'll put the 20 songs that weren't chosen up on the screen for you here to see, and give me your thoughts below. Tell me what you think about this exercise. The survey is still up if you'd like to take it. I'll put that at the bottom of the screen. And if it somehow gets a resurgence, I can always add to this list. But after 3,100 plus votes, I think it's a pretty good indication, I think, of where at least the listeners to my channel feel about some of these Beatles songs. So thank you for watching. As always, please subscribe. That's free. If you want to support the channel in a bigger way, I've got a Patreon subscription that I'll put below and some really cool merchandise. So thank you for watching. Pop goes the 60s.
Rock on, anybody.